My good morning, one and all. Welcome. Thank you for joining us on the Literary Baptists. We're here with a special episode this evening. It's going to be different than our usual that we've built up at this point, but I think a very fun episode. So I'm joined as always by Zach, Nick, and Maddie. How are you all doing this fine evening?
Hey, Lee.
Fantastic.
Hi.
Wonderful.
Everybody survived the big freeze.
Just barely.
Yeah.
Yeah, you Southerners aren't used to the ravages of winter.
Yeah, it turns out our house isn't very well insulated.
Ooh. Yeah, we did okay in our neighborhood. There was a city in Alabama that had like so many pipes burst that it was like causing a real emergency in citywide. Like,
Oh,
it's pretty bad.
oh, yikes!
Yeah,
The government
dripped
had to
our
get
faucet.
involved.
that's right. Yeah. There were like announcements from the city, about make sure if you own a business, go turn your water off. Like, we can't get to everybody, and it was pretty bad. But it just doesn't stay that cold here for that long.
Yeah,
and that was the real issue. But
Yeah, today it's like 70 degrees right now.
yeah, it got up pretty warm today.
How it should be.
All the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I grew up in South Florida, so I might have a skewed view of things, but that's how it should be. We shouldn't be going negative.
No.
It's not okay.
the negative days can be pretty fun. I remember.
Speak for yourself.
We had one. Well, everybody's talking
Right.
about these. They call them bomb cyclones now, which is just the dumbest phrase. I think it's a translation
Because they're
from something.
da bomb.
They're da bomb, that's for sure.
Yeah, that's it.
Well,
Good
I
one.
remembered they used to call them like a polar vortex or something like that. I don't know if it's actually the same weather phenomenon anymore, but it could be two different types of phenomena. But I remember the last time that we had a freeze like this in like quote unquote Arctic conditions, we had those you see those pictures of those snow rollers that basically look like rolls of toilet paper made of snow, that the wind, like as the wind blows snow, it like rolls across the ground and freezes together, and so this whole like roll of snow will go across the ground, and then you wake up in the morning and there's all these like paper towel rolls in your yard. Like, oh, snow rollers, that's cool. That's happened 2 or 3 times up here, at least in my
I have
lifetime.
no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Really?
I've never seen
never
that.
seen or heard of this
You've never heard of
phenomenon
the snow
whatsoever.
rollers?
No.
It's
Oh,
like
not at all.
Ohio's tumbleweeds.
Yeah. Oh gosh. My mom has a picture of me when I was a kid. It happened one winter. I forget how old I was, 10 or 11 maybe. And there's a picture of me just like standing next to one, and you can like there's like a hole in the middle, so you can actually like you can see through to the other side on this roll of snow. It's phenomenal. It's so cool. I'll send you some pictures.
Did you put like, the mini GI Joe, put them inside like they're surfing or something? Like,
You probably could do
roll?
that depending on the size. Some of them were big, some of them were little, and you could you could probably make some interesting pictures out of them.
That would be cool.
Yeah, it was cool, but we got gypped. We didn't have any of those this time because we didn't actually have enough snow. So I felt a little cheated by that. I wanted.
We didn't have any
snowballs.
snow. We just had really, really cold weather.
We had snow, but it doesn't stick together. It just is like fluffy, it's like dust, and then it melts.
It's like dust
Big-
in the wind.
Big old flakes that just disappear when they hit the ground.
You can't like make snowmen or snowballs here. I don't think we've ever had a snow where it wasn't just blowing around in the wind and then that melts.
Man, I'm so
weird.
sad for you guys.
Yeah.
That's so much fun.
I was in graduate school when I first saw snow. So and then
Wow.
it was in Waco, Texas, and we did make snowmen and we did have snowball fights, and I participated completely because I don't care. It was my first time seeing snow, and I will act like a child because it's really fun. Now
you
I just
wanna
hate driving in it. So
yeah, like when you first see snow, like when it's your first time, regardless of how old you are, whether you're an adult or you're a kid, you just want to go jump in that stuff.
I did.
Like throw it around, like make a snowball, or if you're really lucky, it's the right kind of snow where it becomes an ice ball. When you make a snowball in your hand, it'll just turn into ice, and then you chuck that at your friend in the face, and then they hate you forever.
Wow, that
That's how we
escalated
meet people
quickly.
in the north. Yeah,
Speaking
it
of
does.
snow, I read somewhere, I don't remember where, but around Christmas time that we have Charles Dickens to blame / and or thank, depending on your perspective, for expecting a white Christmas.
Really?
Yeah, I guess it was like they had like 8 Christmases in a row that it snowed and then like never again. It's only snowed like 2 times on Christmas for them since. But he had
Wow.
all these associations with the white Christmas. So I don't know. I thought that was interesting, especially being from the Southwest where it can snow where we were high desert, but it rarely did on Christmas, but it was always very disappointing when you did not have snow on Christmas. So thanks, Charles Dickens.
Wow.
Fun fact: South Florida. Growing up in South Florida, we never had a white Christmas.
I'm so surprised by that.
Shocking.
Yeah.
Shocking. Those poor Australians.
Yeah.
Yeah, summer or Christmas for them is like barbecue season, basically. Like everybody's outside in the yard.
At the beach, living the
It's
summer
so
life.
weird. So
I've been to the
weird.
beach more on Christmas than I have been in snow on Christmas. So
You know, depending on the kind of sand you got out there, it could be a white Christmas.
no, we had brown sand.
White sands, white seagulls, white
Yeah, seagulls will
sea
make it
foam.
white.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, they do, with a little dot of black in there.
Yeah,
hate those things.
but we didn't have that as bad as places like Galveston.
I had
Oh,
a
yeah.
seagull steal my McDonald's cheeseburger in Sydney, Australia once.
The entire cheeseburger?
Yes. I had this,
Gosh.
it was because we were in Sydney, it was expensive. It was like $8 back in the day.
Ooh.
And I walked out to the harbor to eat my cheeseburger because I was a hungry tourist, and it attacked me and stole my whole cheeseburger.
I tell you, everything's different
Wow.
there. At least it wasn't a huntsman spider, man.
Yeah. It
Oh,
was
God.
the dangers of Australia strikes again. Seagulls.
When you went to that McDonald's, did it have a sign on it that just said Macca's?
I don't remember, honestly, but probably.
I know I've seen pictures where there are actual McDonald's in various places in Australia that just say Macca's instead of
Macca's.
McDonald's.
I feel like Nick is doing like a performance review or something. He's like, you say something
writing
and he
something
starts
down.
writing it down.
What kind of legal pad is that?
The legal pad, as a matter of fact. The legal pad.
Okay.
I wrote
Well,
down. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to mention a book that I read this year, just because it fits into the conversation. So deal with it. All right. So I just finished
Who reads
reading
books?
Not me. I'm done. After reading this book, I'm done with books forever. I'm putting them off. So Charles Dickens, the same guy who created Unrealistic Expectations, great Unrealistic Expectations.
Yeah, I was gonna say great expectations.
Excellent. Top level joke right there. Good job.
Yeah. So after Christmas Carol, which is a great book, he wrote some other Christmas novels, sort of. And the second one that he wrote is the Chimes, which is actually more of a New Year's book. and I just finished reading it, and it is awful. It is clearly the guy's just trying to cash in on the success of Christmas Carol, and I don't recommend it at all. If you read it right after Christmas Carol, you'd go from wanting to be charitable and caring to just saying, you know what, I don't even care anymore.
It makes you into Scrooge.
It turns you back into Scrooge. So don't, like, I kept thinking, like, don't they have workhouses and prisons for all these people?
Want to
Send them to
decrease
the
the
Marshalsea.
population.
You know, the surplus population just kept popping in my head after reading all this stuff. So
Enter
so
Little
there are some
Dorrit,
great
then,
books, but don't read the Chimes. It's bad. I don't know about the other ones. I think there are 3 more Christmas books that he wrote, but you can skip the Chimes. It's bad.
I remembered hearing something. Oh, it was so I listened to the Christian History podcast. It's a 1517 production. It's a daily podcast. It's normally only like 6 minutes long, but they started doing these weekend editions that are like half an hour long, and they're usually some sort of a deep dive into a particular topic. And so the host Dan Van Voris was doing one specifically about Charles Dickens. He also mentioned that The Man Who Invented Christmas movie, which he also really liked. But he mentioned the multiple Christmas works of his, that, and basically he's like, yeah, Christmas Carol's the best of them all. If you want to read them, you can, but you've really got the best of it with Christmas Carol. And a lot of his later work, it's kind of in that vein of he's just trying to bring the money in again.
Confirmed.
Although, except David
The
Copperfield
Chimes
is
is
good.
awful.
And that was
That's not
later
one of the
book.
official ones. It's like The Cricket on the Hearth, and there's another one with ghosts, Christmas ghosts, I think. I don't know. But the Chimes you can skip. It's terrible. So,
What was
unless you're in the
there?
mood for
What was
something
the deal with like Christmas being like ghost story time? I've never understood that, but that was like the thing.
I guess Christmas Carol probably brought it in.
Thank
Well,
Dickens for that too, I guess.
According to Van
Yeah.
Voris, that's not the case. That he was actually writing in the Christmas ghost story tradition, and that basically he's the reason that we don't tell ghost stories anymore, because now we tell stories about Christmas. It's so weird. But I don't know that he ever explained, like, I don't know if he dug up actually where the tradition came from, but
Well, it kind of reminded me a little bit when I did the deep dive for like the history of Halloween on my other podcast. Just,
good plug. Good job.
The
What's the name of that
Grass-Fed and
podcast?
Grace-Led. Yeah, Grass-Fed and Grace-Led. I haven't done anything in like 2 months because I'm a slacker. But when I did the deep dive on Halloween, there was a lot of kind of that Celtic influence in telling ghost stories in that time period that Charles Dickens was writing. So I don't know how much further in advance that was, but it was, and you kind of see that if you watch that movie, The Man Who Invented Christmas. The movie shows him being kind of inspired to write the story based on like a housemaid that's telling the children kind of a ghostly tale. And so I don't know how accurate. I haven't had time to go look that up or anything, but it did remind me quite a bit of just kind of how a lot of our Halloween traditions and stuff have come to fruition. It's kind of the same idea. And even in the movie, she talks about how, on the eve of Christmas, it's like the spirit world is in this in between state. And that's kind of how they treated the time period around Halloween as well, especially if you go back to like Samhain type stuff. So maybe it's like a UK thing.
Yeah. That character in the movie, in The Man Who Invented Christmas, she's supposed to be Irish, I think. I think she said she was Irish. So that makes sense.
Some
Charles Dickens
leftover
is a
cultural
copier.
history. What a hack.
Yeah. I think just finish the Chimes. I'm pretty much
You're pretty down on
I'm
Dickens right now.
yeah. So
Enough.
Christmas
Enough
Carol's a great
Dickens.
book. Yeah.
We've all
Blech,
been there.
done. I almost quit reading because of it.
Worn off reading. Nothing good can come of this.
No. And yet we persist. Speaking of
Yeah,
which,
I'm not actually going to quit.
speaking of which, we've all done some reading this year. Some we've not enjoyed, very obviously, and some that we have enjoyed. So we thought on this episode, which according to my calendar is the first episode of 2023. So happy New Year, everyone! Woo woo! Yeah, huzzah for the significance of the passage of time. So we wanted to kind of do a little wrap up of our reading year of 2022, and maybe just kind of give an overview of, what we did, if we met any goals that we may have set or may not have set, and share any quotes that really stuck out to us. So, Zach, would you like to go first and sort of give a little summary of what you've been reading this year or last year, I should say?
I'll be happy to go first. Honestly, I think I said this before on one of our previous episodes that I really didn't read as much this year as I have in previous years, at least not until toward the end of the year. I just didn't put time into it. I had a lot of other stuff taking time away from reading. But there were a few things that I've just enjoyed, and I've kept up with them. Ongoing series from some favorite authors, like Brandon Sanderson. Woohoo, Sanderson! Yeah. But
you and the torrent of just rabid internet fans just going crazy right now.
Yes, absolutely. Always going crazy over Sanderson. But he usually releases several books a year. And this one is The Rhythm of War. I don't know if you can see it very well. Big book, but it was the fourth book in the Stormlight archive, which begins with The Way of Kings. And I spend most of my reading time, I guess, in fantasy worlds. So I really enjoy Sanderson's writing. He does a really good job of world building and magic systems, I guess, is kind of his focus: world building and magic systems. With someone like Tolkien, you get a lot more of the highbrow vocabulary. You get less of that with Sanderson. He's more readable in that way, but still weaves a really well thought out story, and it's entertaining. Another author that I've really enjoyed reading is Will White, and I've kept up with his series. It's the Cradle series, which sounds weird. It's not anything about babies. But it's essentially the Cradle is the name of it's a planet basically that fosters certain life. And there's a whole lot of different layers in the story, but it centers mostly on a few characters that are trying to grow in power to combat just a threat to all reality, basically. Like universe ending stuff, so it's all about how do we get to the next level. So I've found that I really enjoy stories about characters that are pushing themselves to hit the next level, whatever that is. And sometimes it's clearly mapped out and sometimes it's not so clear. So, but anyway, Brandon Sanderson, Will White, those are two authors I would recommend in the modern fantasy genre. So,
It sounds like you would really enjoy Dune.
you know, I got to listen to about half of Dune, and I still need to. I'm going to have to buy it, I guess, and just read it. But the first, I would say, quarter of it, I was pretty bored. It was hard to get through, but it started getting really good after that.
Yeah.
Like it took a lot of time to get to where I was like, okay, I'm interested now.
He took his sweet fat time setting the world up, the
did.
galaxy up. I should say the universe.
Yeah, there's so much you're like, I have no idea what this is talking about. Like, I don't know what this is in reference to, and
bunch
you're
of
just
jargon.
yeah, it's just you have to build that up a long time, and then it gets good. But I'm
That's
gonna have
something
to
that
finish it.
Brandon Sanderson does really well. I'll give him credit for that. And he does kind of carry you along through the world in a narrative
Yeah.
way. He's not just
Yeah.
setting out, a whole chapter full of jargon for you to know. He's carrying you through it all. He does very well at that.
Yes. Keeps you hooked, I guess. But
Very good.
I'm done.
All right, Maddie, would you like to go next? What have you been reading in 2022?
Yeah, sure. So I think I've read 58 books this year. There's a chance that I've forgotten as I scrolled through. It's like, I think there's a couple that I didn't put in there, but because I keep track on Goodreads. That's been real helpful, and it's also very motivating to keep reading. It's raining a lot right now. I don't know if you can hear that, but it just started pouring down rain. Okay, good. But yeah, I've read like such a myriad of stuff. It was actually, and I've read for the majority of the books that I've read this year, they've all been really good books. So part of that's just because I've had the liberty of choosing the books I want to read, and most of them are like recommendations or highly beloved books. So that's kind of added to the benefit of enjoyment, reading it that way. There's a couple like top contenders. This is the first year in a couple years that I've actually read a lot of fiction. I think I started reading because in the past I'm known to like pick up a fiction book and never put it down. And that's hard to do when you're a mom and you have responsibilities and people to feed and sleep, because I could stay up till 3 or 4 in the morning reading a good book if I wanted to, but that kind of died
We
out
all
for
understand
me.
what it's like to be
Yeah.
mom.
That's an interesting
Yeah.
perspective because I've never been a mom before, but I can't wait for it to happen.
All you have to do is want it and believe it, and you can do
Sure.
it.
I'm every woman.
There you go.
We believe in you, Lee.
Yep. Thank you.
But yeah, just having that. So like nonfiction books are easier to set down, generally speaking. You can just set them down and be done. But fiction, you're like in a world and you're living in it, and so it's a bit harder. But I think I started doing a lot of fiction with my kids. And so that's kind of kept the fiction going, but that's, dependent on them being around to listen to it. But we finished early in the year, we finished the Green Ember series and some of the side stories for that. And that was really fantastic. And I'm just going to plug family reading. If you're not doing it, like if you have kids at home and you're not reading books together as a family, I'm going to encourage you to do so. A large reason why I like that, a lot of the like homeschool type podcasts are talking about the read aloud family and stuff like that. But what I've loved about it is that our whole family kind of bonds over these stories. So like we have our own like inside jokes that are based on stories. Like we named our rabbit Pickett after the character in Green Ember, and we'll just make little jokes. And it's been fun because my kids are entering into the teens, they're preteens and teens. And I love that we still have that together. So reading these books or listening to books, because we picked up some audiobooks. We did a road trip this year to see the Ark, and the Creation Museum in Kentucky, and we listened to The Hobbit by Andy Serkis on a road trip, and that was an absolute blast. Funner than the movie. Obviously, the Hobbit movie isn't very good, but it was a lot of fun.
Can concur, but not as bad as Rings of Power.
I would almost disagree with that a little bit, but that's a whole other.
What?
With Maddie on that
Hold
one.
up.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like, what's her name? The chick that shows up in The Hobbit, not even a real character. Anyways.
Oh, Toriel.
Yeah,
Give
Tariel.
me a break.
We digress. We digress. But we listened to The Hobbit and we started The Fellowship, read by Andy Serkis as well on the way home. So it's just been really fun. And what's fun for me with doing the audiobooks is my family is I've already read these books. And they're both, my son and my husband are super into Lord of the Rings movies, but they've never read the books themselves. And they're kind of reluctant readers themselves. And doing the audiobook has been really good for that. And it's introduced them to just the beauty of literature and how much more you get in the story than when you watch the movie. And I think that's been really fun just to do as a family. So, the Lord of the Rings books I did this year, we finished Green Ember, we started Wing Feather Saga. So a lot of those highly popular books, in our circles for sure were really good. And then I picked up Emma by Jane Austen for the first time this summer, and that was kind of a bold move when I look back to start reading Jane Austen for the first time with Emma, because it's, I think, other than Mansfield Park, I think it's one of her bigger books. But anyways, it was great and I loved it. I loved her insightfulness on human nature, and that was just a really fun read. And then Dracula. So I had a couple rereads this year that were from high school, actually. Dracula is one of them. I remember liking Dracula in high school, and then thinking about it this year is like, you know what? I don't even know if I'd still like it. Like if I read it now, everything that I know now and all this kind of stuff. So I picked Dracula up again and pressured you guys into reading it
Dracula.
with me. And it did not disappoint me, for sure. Rereading it again, I think I enjoyed it probably even more than I did in high school in different ways. So that was, but what was cool is that it had been so long that I didn't remember how it ended. Like I had vague memories of like what happened, but it was kind of like reading it for the first time. And then one of my favorite books this year to read was Jane Eyre. And I hated that book in high school. Absolutely hated it. Partly because I cheated and I read the Spark Notes. I only read like half of the book. And my English teacher kind of ruined it for us. And it was just, I couldn't understand. I knew how it ended and I couldn't understand why anyways, I don't want to spoil it for you guys, but I read it this time and I really absolutely loved it. It was a fun read, and she had me Googling words on basically every page.
I love it when that happens.
Yeah.
That is such a great experience.
Yeah. I guess I need to know what that means.
One of the many benefits of reading good books.
Yes, absolutely.
Just vocabulary exploding.
It's much easier with a Kindle or something like that, though.
I love that feature on a Kindle. Yeah.
Yeah, I like real books, so I don't read it on a Kindle.
Snob.
I do want to try a Kindle at some point, but I do love building a physical library and having a book in my hands. That's something that I think discourages a lot of people from reading kind of some of the older books, is the vocabulary can be a little bit dense. But I think if you're curious like me, then you'll probably look up a lot of the words. But I think if you just keep reading, like you kind of figure it out contextually anyways. And then maybe revisit on a second reading. So Jane Eyre is
that's good poetry advice too, by the way.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, you guys have kind of introduced me to poetry. I've talked about it before that I'm not a poetry person. I've had bad experiences with it, but it is really helpful to reread it a few times usually, because poetry is pretty short, generally speaking. And then yeah, because I think I've always felt the pressure to understand the poem immediately. And because I couldn't understand the poem, I was like, I hate it.
Because of your fiction brain.
Yes.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
That's
I was like,
understandable.
why can't I understand it? But
Yeah.
yeah, so that's good. And then Beowulf was another, just always heard of Beowulf, always referenced Beowulf. I had no idea what it was. I thought it was that stupid cult classic movie that was supposed to be terrible or something. Like, I had no idea it was even a book until recently. But I just had so much fun reading Beowulf. I was nerding out and very excited, and drug my kids along with me to reading Beowulf as well, because we were doing that time frame in history, and that's what I've loved to do in our history for school, is incorporating works from the same time frame in that, so that they can really be immersed in the world, as it were, through literature. And so that's been a lot of fun this year. And I've also read a lot of fantastic nonfiction books. I recently finished a book by Robert Leatham on Eastern Orthodoxy from a Reform perspective. I think it's called Through Western Eyes. I don't have it right in front of me, but I'm pretty sure that's what it's called. And that was very helpful, because Eastern Orthodoxy is always something that, like, we don't really understand fully, and people are like, I don't really know what they believe. So that was neat to interact with it from a Reform perspective. I liked that a lot. And a biography that I read is about Anne Judson, who is the wife of Adoniram Judson, and they were missionaries to Burma, which is present-day Myanmar. And wow, like, if you want to talk about Christians who are like sold out for the gospel and winning souls, yeah, take
Sold
that,
out,
Arminians.
SOULED.
Yeah, take that, Arminians, Calvinists like to evangelize too.
It's true.
It was just a fantastic. In fact, because we are the literary Baptists, I have a really cool commonplace quote here from her journal that's in this book. The book is called My Heart in His Hands. It's written by Sharon James. I think the newest edition, they just call it Anne Judson of Burma. I think they removed My Heart in His Hands, because when I tried to search for it, it was really hard to find. But I think the newer printings are just Anne Judson by Sharon James. But she does a really good job in here. But here's one of the quotes I liked, that it was as early on in their mission, and she's writing all these journal entries, and her husband Adoniram has been dealing with some of the Baptist missionaries. Who's the Baptist guy who was in India? Super famous. When my brain's washing.
William Carey.
Yeah, so he's interacting with William Carey, and he's being challenged on some of his Paedo-Baptist beliefs, and so he's struggling with it, and she's not happy about it. So she writes to her friend. She's writing a letter in her journal to a friend, and she says, I felt afraid he would become a Baptist and frequently urged the unhappy consequences if he should. But he said his duty compelled him to satisfy his own mind and embrace those sentiments which appeared most concordant with Scripture. I always took the Paedo-Baptist side in reasoning with him, even after I was doubtful of the truth of that system as he. We left Serampore, probably said that wrong, to reside in Calcutta a week or two before the arrival of our brethren, and as we had nothing in particular to occupy our attention, we confined it exclusively to this subject. We procured the best authors on both sides, compared them with scriptures, examined and re-examined the sentiments of Baptists and Paedo-Baptists, and were finally compelled, from a conviction of truth, to embrace those of the former. Thus, my dear Nancy, we are confirmed Baptists, not because we wish to be, but because truth compelled us to be.
Woohoo!
So many Baptist
Right.
happy dances right now.
Right? We still love you, Paedo-Baptists that are listening. We still love you.
Yeah, you're the
But
people
Maybe you
we
should
learn
grab some
theology
books.
from usually.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So, but that book is just, I highly recommend it. Man or woman, read it. It's just an awesome, very insightful and inspiring, and she was a very bright mind. And you can see that for sure. She really worked through a lot of theological things and lived it out in real time. So super inspiring. So I would definitely recommend that, especially coming up in our reading challenge. Whoop whoop. Which
Spoiler alert.
alerts.
spoiler alert. Yeah. I'm really good at either calling those out or just dropping spoiler alerts. But take notes, my friends. And then I just have one more. Well, I don't know. How am I on time? Should I
Yes,
stop?
do it. One more.
Okay. One more. Okay. So
need it.
another book that I read that I liked this year was The Medieval Mind of C.S. Lewis. And so that was pretty good. And there's a couple quotes. I might actually pull another one of these up later in our discussion if it comes up. But I really liked this where it's talking about kind of Lewis's take on people's obsession with being up to date and in the know and reading the news. And he really was struggling with like the speed and the fast-paced life kind of, and he really wanted things to slow down. So I liked this quote in here where it's talking about Lewis, and it says, in a second passage in Surprised by Joy, Lewis targets newspaper reading, mocking the falsity of the desire to be up to date, which he labeled as an appalling waste of time and spirit. Those who do read the newspaper acquire an incurable taste for vulgarity and sensationalism and the fatal habit of fluttering from paragraph to paragraph to learn how an actress has been divorced in California, a train derailed in France, and quadruplets born in New Zealand. With age, grew more and more pessimistic about modernity, how it tends to annihilate space and increase in speed, melt down everything into liquid modernity, and to occupy our minds with an endless and meaningless rush of flotsam and jetsam. The bustle and self-importance of these quote-unquote real-world concerns permeate our minds and make us feel that the task of study and attentiveness are somehow unimportant, outdated, or passé.
Wow.
Yeah.
That was a tour de force.
I love that whole section though on that
That
chapter.
is so good.
You should post it on Twitter.
I don't think it would fit.
Gotta wait till
What
they
a
increase
tweet
the word
storm that
limit.
would be.
But it's so true. And then I think it's hard. So many of us get kind of spiraled into anxiety because I feel like we almost know too much about what's going on in the world that like we can't
Yeah,
process
our
it in a
brains
healthy
weren't
way.
built to take in that much information and that much bad news, especially.
Exactly. And just the obsession of being in the know and everything. And it's so contrary to how we think now because we have so much access to news. But
I
man,
think it
he was
really
on
limits
point.
your attention span too.
Yes.
Really,
Oh,
I think
yeah.
I think that mine has been really affected over the last few years.
Oh, yeah.
Just
Yeah.
I find that
Well,
I have a much harder time sitting down for long periods of time to read or to really do anything. I'm just like, okay.
yeah, like can you watch a movie without being on your phone
Mhm.
and scrolling at the same time?
I can do that,
Hard.
but
I'm multitasking through everything I watch, even YouTube videos, like
Yeah.
picture in picture on my phone, and I'm doing something else.
One of the things about that like constant flow of information is that you don't have time to analyze it critically
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
determine whether what you're getting in terms of news or from anywhere, whether it's true or not. You basically like shorthand it by saying, is this guy on my team or not?
Mhm.
Sometimes, and you just kind of go from it from that point. But your team is wrong sometimes.
Yeah.
So
How
they're
dare
not.
you?
It reminds me, I don't know how you say his name. Is it Anthony Trollope or Trollope?
yeah, Anthony Trollope. Yeah.
Yeah. That book that Nick recommended, The Warden, there's that section there where he's kind of going after the kind of tabloid writer of the day. And it's the same thing, but now it's like not only are people just getting these little bite-sized nuggets of news and running with it, but now it's like headlines. Like people don't even read the article anymore. They just see the headline. And if you click, like I make it a habit to click on these articles and read them, you find that the headline's very misleading. But it
Oh,
just
yeah.
creates it just creates this whole hype.
Well, and
And
you always have access to the headline, but very rarely anymore do you have access to the entire article as well.
right.
At least in Trollope's day, you could buy a newspaper and read every article in it, depending on how long it takes you to read it all and process it, as far as time goes, but you could at least access all the information. Now,
Right.
you can't. The best you get is the little snippet or the comment, the retweet with comment that somebody shares on Twitter. That's all the information you end up getting, if it or you find a way behind the paywall. But it's very
Yeah, I
annoying.
tried to share an article today and it was behind a paywall. So
It's a good story, Nick.
yeah. Messed
Yeah.
up.
I was listening. I sometimes listen to YouTube videos done by the Daily Stoic, and some of his stuff is really interesting. And I'm a budding philosopher anyway. And, no, just kidding. But
Chapter and verse.
yeah, exactly. He was talking about people talking about how you in order to be an informed citizen, you got to sit down and watch the 6 o'clock news, and you need to
Mm.
you need to read all the newspapers or all this stuff. And he said, I'm pretty sure the only way to truly be an informed citizen these days is to shut out all those outlets and read history. Like, that's
Yes.
the only way for you to really understand what we're going through now and what's going to lead, what it's going to lead to, and how to see, ways around our current problems, is by looking to the past, not whatever kooky thing people are coming up with right now to get clicks.
Well, we've
And
become
I think he's
so
onto something there.
yeah, we become so like decontextualized from history, reality, that it's, I don't know, like I don't even have the words. It's just shocking how people view the world because of that. They like live in their own little bubbles all the time. But yet because of the news and stuff like that, they think that they are so much more informed than people before them.
Doom scrolling
You
doesn't
shape
inform anyone.
you shape your views and everything based on what you believe about history. And if you cut and you only focus on one part of history, and I think Americans today, history basically started at World War II. And like, I don't,
Because that's
I mean,
what the
if you
movies
go,
say.
I mean, kind of like there are some things that they'll talk about, there might have, they might talk about slavery or something like that. But even if you go to in a used bookstore, you go to the history section, it's going to be like 90% World War II and later. You're not going to find the entire rest of history, which is quite a bit. I don't know if you noticed, but
There's a
the
lot.
Earth is
There's a
more than
lot.
100 years old. Yeah.
We're young Earth creationists, but not that young.
Yeah, exactly.
1776.
That's right.
I don't know. Thus generally ends. I mean, I could talk so much more on everything that I read, but I'll leave room for y'all.
Saint Nicholas, what do you have for us?
I
Have you
gonna
slapped
stop.
Arius yet?
Yes. Yeah, I did that. I do it every year. I go to the local Kingdom Hall and just
Yes.
Just find some stranger and smack 'em.
just smack them. So like Maddie, I also keep track on Goodreads. I'm a little bit more inconsistent. I'll come in like every few weeks and just say, all right, these are the ones I've read in the past few weeks and everything. But I had a lot of political reads this year. I was very involved in politics, and so a lot of them have kind of that theme. And one of them is a history book. I read Xenophon's Anabasis. His the army goes into Persia to kind of usurp the king of Persia. They win the battle, but they lose um, the head of their army, the Persians. So they have to escape, and they do it. So it's kind of a fun one, but it also gives you a little bit of this perspective on just how kind of pointless some of these things are. You have this huge battle, and then it just turns out to be completely useless, which is a lot of that political stuff that I was involved in this year ended up being kind of useless. So,
Feels
so
good, man.
All is vanity.
it exactly. So I've had that. I did also read. So I've not been a big fan of audiobooks in the past, but I started listening to audiobooks this year. One of them was Medieval Mind of C.S. Lewis. I listened to that as an audiobook, which probably isn't great for an audio one, but I thought the folks did a really good job. But the first one I listened to that really got me into it was called Red Scarf Girl by Zhili Jiang. I don't know how to pronounce Chinese names, so
Ooh, interesting.
that's probably off. But it's about the Cultural Revolution, and it is really sad. It's about a girl who's growing up during this time when Mao is saying we need to get rid of the old China and go to a new China, using basically young people as squads to go and tear down statues or criticize people for not getting on board with these new ideas. And a few people had recommended it and kind of made some comparisons to the past few years as well. It's not quite as extreme. People weren't being sent to re-education camps and things like that, but it was pretty terrifying. And some of the similarities were interesting. And while
Wow, critics compared it to the Diary of Anne Frank.
yeah, I mean,
Is it
maybe
intense like that?
it's horrifying. She keeps, these terrible things keep happening. And you think she's finally going to think that Mao's the bad guy, and just she's like, but Mao said so.
Oh
And
my
it's just
goodness.
like, so you're continuing on this, and it's really sad. And that's a period in history that I didn't know much about. Chinese history, I mean, maybe we were taught some of it in school, but it didn't stick. But the Cultural Revolution is something that I think
we don't get enough. We don't get
need
enough
to.
instruction on that.
Yeah, it's a great book, and the audiobook is good too. I don't remember who did it, but
I'll have links in the show notes for the books that I'm trying to get as many of them as I can for the books that we mentioned, but I do have to mention I'm looking up this one on Amazon. The paperback's only $8.99. Like, there's no reason for anybody to not buy this book.
it's worth it. It's worth it. I'm gonna skip some of these that I wrote down. I read a book by Graham Greene, and it's called The Quiet American. He always has these books that come out right before huge events. So this is a book that takes place in Vietnam, but it's right before he wrote it, right before the Vietnam War. He wrote another book called Our Man in Havana, and it takes place right before the communist revolution. Like, he writes these things, and then like the next year or something, the country just falls apart.
Wow.
Graham
And
Greene destroyed the world.
yeah, I blame him for most of the 20th century.
He destroyed his own life, so why not the entire century?
Yeah. Now it was taking place during like the French period of the Vietnam War. I guess they called it the French Indochina War. And that's kind of the big point, is war is bad.
Yeah.
So Xenophon shows you how useless it is, and Quiet American kind of shows how it's more it's useless, but it's also sad. And that's really the biggest thing. Like Phineas Finn by Anthony Trollope, I read that this year. Big long novel. The pointlessness of things, of political work. You have all these things, Parliament, they're working to do this or that, and something happens and it all falls apart. It doesn't always you can't always tell a great Hollywood ending in reality. And I think
Isn't
the
that
books
true?
that I've read and the life that I lived this year speak to that.
It sounded so dark.
Living Ecclesiastes over here.
Yeah, politically, not everything, but just politics doesn't always work out that way. I read G.K. Chesterton's Eugenics and Other Evils, and Science.
Chesterton, another based papist,
Yeah,
like
I
Tolkien.
love him. I
Yeah.
love Chesterton. He he saw that science isn't always, you can't always just trust the science. And
Well, I
he
don't know what you're
was
talking about.
What?
I'm talking about eugenics.
Thus, the science
kidding.
said it was fine.
Yeah, the science
We
was
trust the
Doctors said
science.
so.
We're gonna have a disclaimer
Yeah.
on this episode.
Yeah,
The
well,
men in the
they
white
said it was
coats
great.
said it was okay.
and Chesterton's like, no, this is bad. And there were some other things in there. And he always has this weird blind spot about Calvinism. He's always he makes shots at it sometimes, and it's like, I don't think you understand it. But
Wasn't
for
it
most other
Piper?
things,
Wasn't it Piper who said, like, I don't have a problem with what he says because he's not actually addressing Calvinism anyways?
that's pretty much
I think
true.
I mean, that's not a direct quote, but
It couldn't be worse than
No.
anything Leighton Flowers has ever said.
It's close. He blames he had the biggest blind spot, but everything else, it's like, yeah, you got that right. You've really thought about it there. And then he's just like, let's blame it on the Protestants. It's like, I don't know, man.
that's
Protestants
classic
are like half the
papist,
people
though.
reading you now.
Classic.
Yeah.
You fell for the classic
So-
blunders.
But some of the things that he said, some of the issues that he was dealing with scientists and politicians having a close relationship, and politics influencing science, some of those seemed familiar to me. And
Yeah.
so I thought it was a very interesting,
I don't understand why.
no
What are you
reason.
talking about, Nick?
You have
What-
such a big brain. That
What's
attic is so
fascinating,
full
though,
of ideas.
about what you're saying with the Protestants, though, is I think sometimes they're not wrong in that you see kind of this weird link of like Protestantism with like the Enlightenment modernity issue. And really a lot of times they're more the
Mhm.
progressive Protestants
Mhm.
at the time. But yeah, so even then
Mhm.
sometimes he's not wrong, but it's not true historic
Mhm.
Protestantism.
Yes. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. If he's talking about the main line, sure.
Yeah.
But he does talk about Calvinism sometimes, and it's like, you don't know what Calvinism is.
Yeah.
Sorry. And but with the mainline criticisms, I mean, a lot of those you could
You could
point
go
at
with.
the Roman Catholic Church right now.
Mhm.
I mean, I can support them
Yeah.
both ways.
Yeah,
So
and Rome isn't removed from any of those. They're they're as mainline as the mainline Protestants are. Like it's all various shades of the same color.
yeah, no one's going around saying that Pope Francis is like a traditionalist or a conservative in any kind of way.
What's so funny though about the science part, like not trusting science, is in the Anne Judson book, she's being slowly poisoned by mercury because that was the doctor's treatment for whatever ailment she had. And so she doesn't realize that she's following and the doctors don't mean ill will. They just
Yeah, they
don't
were
know what
following
they're
the
actually
Hippocratic
doing.
Oath. They just didn't know what they were doing.
Exactly.
They're trusting the science.
Fortunately, science has
Yes.
gotten past all that, and science is infallible now.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, man, it's a
Highly,
good thing.
most
Even though they've
highly
messed
evolved.
up, yeah, it's perfect now. They don't mess up ever. So,
Nope.
so that's good.
I'm glad we've moved past
But-
that.
So that's my big themes were political. I also read, I might mess this up, Vindicii contra Tyrannus.
Oh, that's on my
Um,
bookshelf.
Yeah, I Canon Press did a
Mhm.
a version of it, and it's very good. It talks about what the foundations of, like, the Protestant foundations for what government is, and when you can oppose the king, and there is, like, there are some situations where you can impose a you can depose a king, and so I think it influenced the American founders. Kind of makes it like, all right, this is okay. It's not against the Bible, and I think it's pretty convincing as well. He's writing in the Huguenot time period in France.
My
So
favorite
you're
French.
you're a
people.
theonomist now. Is that what you're
Yeah,
saying?
basically.
We're getting the
Yeah,
big
no.
spotlight out on you. Tell us.
I am not a theonomist, but I do think it's a good book. Yeah.
Junius Brutus, which I think was a pen name.
Yeah, they don't know. There are different. There are a few, 5 or 6 different like candidates for who wrote it, and no one really knows.
Is by reading it? Could you tell, was it one voice, or could it have been multiple people writing it together? Did it
I
it
was
have
reading a
that collage
translation,
feeling?
so
I guess that's true. Yeah.
I'm reading a translation, but
One voice.
it seemed
So it's univocal.
yeah, it was very organized, and so it could have been the result of conversations, and then it became one. But it seemed very organized. I didn't get that sense at all.
Cool.
That it was different
Interesting.
voices. So
Excellent.
yeah, that's my list.
My list is pretty short, although I actually thought my list would be shorter than this because I just feel like I didn't read that much this year at all. This is the first year that I didn't solely read theology books because that's just been my thing. I did read some theology, but I really hadn't read a novel since college, basically. And that was I graduated, gosh, 10 years ago. So it's I've just been cramming, just not much fiction. But this year I've been on obviously a Tolkien kick. So I read the Silmarillion again in 2022. That's basically becoming like an annual reread for me. This will be 2023 will be the 3rd year in a row that I've read the Silmarillion at least once. So I think I just love that book. It's become very important to me as a Tolkien fan.
It's become precious to you.
It is precious to me. I choked my own cousin to death for my copy of it. If any of my cousins are listening, they're gonna laugh, but I have never tried to choke my cousin, any cousin.
Watch out.
Why?
Take it as a warning.
I will say every cousin of mine that I hung out with over Thanksgiving and Christmas did survive. So this year they were safe. On the theological front, I listened to Simply Trinity by Matthew Barrett on Audible. My goodness, definitely the most important non-Holy Spirit inspired book that I read this year. Loved it to pieces. I'm going to be buying. I don't have a paper copy. I only have the Audible version. I will be buying a paper copy, even just for resource material. I've been up there. It is great cover too. Really beautiful cover design. I've just been blabbing to people at church about it constantly. And so I really, really enjoyed that book. I read a thriller. Again, this was another Audible book. The Terminal List. The guy who wrote it, Jack Carr, used to be a frogman, and his character, his main character, is in the teams. Had a horrific incident, and it was very very engrossing. Of course, Amazon started a series based on the book, which kind of inspired me. And I will say their adaptation of the book on Amazon, because the first season is the first book in the series, their adaptation of this book was much better than whatever it was Rings of Power was. So I will heartily recommend the show. Obviously there's lots of graphic violence, so in some language, so take what you will. But Maddie, you mentioned earlier about the Andy Serkis audiobook. Those are amazing. If anybody's an Audible member,
good.
or you just have some extra cash laying around, you need to buy those. They're fantastic. It's so different than the Rob Inglis one that came before. Like it's performed, it's acted. He's not as good of a singer as Rob Inglis is, but I hope that's his name. I know it's Inglis. I can't remember. I think it's Rob.
I think it's Rob.
And so I wish I could have a master cut of it that has Inglis singing, but then Andy Serkis's characterization. He really makes the books come alive. It's one of the best produced audiobooks that I've listened to. Very well done. Very well done. Again, another Audible book in the Tolkien line was I listened to Children of Hurin, read by Christopher Lee. A must-have. He's like the perfect voice for such a dark story as Children of Hurin. It is so good. Again, another one totally worth the money. I plan to like use these recommendations to like Tolkien enable people who have never read him before. Just like download Fellowship in the Serkis version. And then once that hooks you, you know, man, that Children of Hurin. I technically only have 3 hours left. So by the time this show releases, I will be done with it. But it was very good. I read Fellowship and The Two Towers this year. Listen to it on Audible with the Andy Serkis version. Again, another. It was so much Audible this year, you guys. I do a lot of this while I'm mowing my grass because my grass takes like 3 hours to mow, and so I will just power through books. Yeah, got a lot of grass up here in Ohio. So I
found out too that you can return Audible books and get your credit back within the first year.
Yep. Yeah,
I don't recommend doing that to the ones you mentioned. But if you end up getting a book that you're like, you can get your credit back.
Yep.
You can get a lot of audiobooks for if your local library has Hoopla or something like it.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure the Serkis
The Hobbit we were able to listen to on Hoopla.
Yeah, I think
we had to buy
some of the others are.
At least at the time they didn't have the Lord of the Rings trilogy at all on Hoopla at the time. I don't know if that's changed, but
yeah, I'm sure it changes
just for G-Wiz
pretty often. But they have some good stuff.
I've been a Libby user. That's been my
kind of the same.
My app. It's the same kind of thing. I have a library card actually through the Digital Library of Ohio, and so I can get access to a lot of stuff, and it's not dependent on my little local library. So I have taken actually a lot of the Audible books that I've bought them because I listened to them first on Libby and wanted to have it on demand on my phone whenever I wanted instead of having to put a hold on it and try to get through the whole thing in 2 weeks. So let's see. I did some true crime. This is actually a re-listen as well, but I'll Be Gone in the Dark by Michelle McNamara about the so she's passed away, but she was also the wife of what's his face who was on King of Queens. He played he was the little guy. What's his name? Doggone it. Anyway, he's an actor. She was like an internet sleuth. Like that was her thing. Like an internet, like she'd buy public records and figure things out. She'd done lots of sleuthy things over her life, and she was really invested in the search for the Golden State Killer. And it's actually her work actually did result in them finding the guy, first reopening the cold case, finding the guy, and he's now in prison. But unfortunately she wasn't alive to see him brought to justice. But the book is fantastic. Maddie mentioned earlier about the social pressure surrounding Dracula. I did read Dracula. I think, did we all finish it?
Finished.
Yeah, I think we all finished it. I read that one on paper and loved it. It fell through for me a little bit halfway through. I kind of I lost steam for a little bit. Everybody was just talking nice to each other all the time, and it just got narratively boring. Like Van Helsing, I know you love everyone and everyone is your friend. You know, the positivity, I love it, but you know, it's time to get the stakes out. Okay. And they
They'll
did.
explain later. Just
They,
be
I'll
patient.
explain later. That's the
Yeah.
thing. Yeah.
Well,
Just
that's part
explain
of
it
our
later.
problem is that we're so impatient. Like it's hard for us to read the 19th century literature because we're like, hurry up and get there.
Mhm. Well, and I could feel in myself. It was actually, it was a great book, but I learned a lot about myself as well when I read it. Because you know, I sleep in a coffin full of dirt too, and I thought I had come up with that idea, but I guess, you know, there are no new ideas. Um, I guess I
Does
wasn't
the
aware of.
does the what is it called? The host burn you when you touch it?
Well, yeah, that's why I'm a Baptist.
Okay.
And then
The
of course
real
I hate
absence.
garlic. Those flowers just drive me nuts.
Real absence. Gosh.
Real absence.
Wow, that's good, Maddie.
I guess I realized when I was reading it that I have consumed so much vampire related media over my life that it was really hard for me to disassociate myself from that and read what basically is the source material for the vampire entertainment phenomenon that has dominated, you know, the spooky side of the world for a long time. So um, it was very interesting. It was interesting to learn kind of about myself and how enculturated I really am when it comes to certain things. And it makes me want to work harder to kind of put those things aside when I'm reading a book, especially a book about something that, you know, I've known about for a long time, and read it for what it is.
What's striking about Dracula too is like you can come at it with a lot of presuppositions from what you've heard people say Dracula is about.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's, oh, it's AIDS or homosexuality or the sexual revolution or blah blah blah. You're like, where are you people getting this from?
Mm-hmm.
Is clearly like the devil.
Yeah, he is Satan.
Dracula is the devil.
Yeah, and that drove me nuts when I started, because in the middle of reading it, I decided to turn on the like 4-part Dracula movie thing that's on Netflix, and basically that whole Freudian reading was all the first episode of that series. Basically, was the subtext for the whole thing, except that they made Jonathan Harker a vampire, or like turning into a vampire, which was like, oh, all right. So we're definitely taking major liberties here, uh but yeah, that whole Freudian reading that seems to subsume the public conversation about Dracula was up front and center for sure. Definitely, I don't recommend that Dracula show in any way. There's much better vampire media out there. And then lastly, I was on the Beowulf train as well. I actually, over the course of this year, really over the last couple months, I've read Beowulf 3 times in three different versions. Mentioning, I know Nick, you mentioned a Canon Press book earlier. I'll jump in on that too. One of the versions of Beowulf that I took in was an Audible version. It was an audio book. I think it's a fresh translation, either done by Doug Wilson or by somebody else, or with the help of someone else, in a verse translation that he does in an Audible format. And it was like 3 hours long, but it had like that whole like horse galloping Anglo-Saxon poetry thing to it. A great listen. But then I also I reread the original book that I had in high school when I read Beowulf the first time. The Raffle, I think it was the guy's name, the Raffle translation.
That's the one I read.
That one's, I think it's a Signet Classics or something like that is
Yeah.
yeah. And then I read Tolkien's translation of it. I was disappointed that it wasn't a verse translation, but I figured of all people he would work on it poetically, but Still very good. There's obviously other stuff in here as well, not just the poem, but I had a couple quotes to share. This is one I really liked. God was Lord then of all the race of men, even as he yet is. Wherefore is understanding in the heart that taketh thought in every time and place the best. Much must he endure of sweet and bitter, who long time here in these days of trouble enjoyeth life in the world. With an exclamation mark. I thought that was a good kind of encapsulation of life in the world. And then
It sounds like something that could be in the Silmarillion. Like I know that obviously the translation is, but it even just the ideas sound very Tolkien like, which clearly he stole them from the author of Beowulf.
Another hack.
Thieves.
That was kind of the thing I took away from it. Like, I can see all of the Middle Earth, the ripples in this that eventually wash up on shore in Middle Earth. I really could see that.
That was very poetically.
Wow, thank you. I could see that happening here. So it felt less like reading Beowulf and felt like reading Tolkien reading Beowulf, if that makes sense. And then what Tolkien would go on to do. Yeah, super valuable. And then another one, I don't want to spoil too much about it. If anybody's going to go read it for the first time. But Beowulf, he's going after a hidden treasure. So Beowulf, even thus it was with Beowulf, when he sought out the Barrow's guardian, his guile and malice, he knew not himself through what means his parting from the world should come about. To this end had the mighty chieftains, those that there had laid it, set a deep curse upon it until the day of doom, that man should be for his crimes condemned, shut in the houses of devils, fast in the bonds of hell, tormented with clinging evil, who should that place despoil. Alas, Beowulf, ere he went, had not more carefully considered the old possessor's will that cursed the gold. And yeah, I kind of saw in that, that deeply human desire to meddle with things that we shouldn't meddle with. And so even though it's set here as sort of a cursed, lost and buried treasure, that he's going to go take, that he actually had no right to take. It's very much a very human fatal flaw. And it's amazing to think in a work so old can be so universal still. Just a fantastic work of literature. I intend to read Beowulf at least one more time. I have the Seamus Heaney translation that I've never actually read before. And that's going to be happening in 2023. For sure.
That's the one I read in college.
I really like seeing that old English on the left and then our English on the right.
Yeah.
And it needs to be a poem. Like that's kind of one of my pet peeves is like, I really don't like reading prose translations of Beowulf. Like it
Thinking
needs to be a
back,
poem.
I read Beowulf in college, but we didn't read it in high school. But we did read Grendel, which is a more recent novel that it's supposed to take Grendel's point of view, and he's nihilist and everything. We read way too much like modern responses to literature. I mean, we read Vonnegut in high school. Like that, our high school English classes were very weird.
Wow.
I don't think that's a good thing. They're easier to read. They're easier to
style wise,
yeah. But it's they're not good.
no.
I mean, Vonnegut's funny, but his message is kind of the opposite of what literature was for thousands of years or whatever.
Yeah.
So I'm for Beowulf, even though I haven't read it in a long time.
Yeah.
I'll read
Yeah,
Hanging with You.
I became even more passionately Team Beowulf through the fall and beginning of winter.
What was funny is while I read a chunk of it with my husband around, and he got all excited when he found out that the dragon's name was Grendel because he has a gun. I think it's a 6.5 Grendel. He's like, "Oh, that's named after the dragon in Beowulf." I was like, well, "The more you know, I guess."
Dude,
It was pretty cool.
that is awesome. I wanna name one of my pocket knives the Vorpal blade.
Is it the
Hack up
Jabberwocky?
Yeah, from Jabberwocky, man. And the frumiest Bandersnatch. I did
Somebody
a
earlier today used the word frabjous
oh
to me,
yeah,
like, was
Frabjous
talking to
Day,
me,
Kaloo Calais.
and I was just thinking, like, that's from the Jabberwocky, isn't it? That's just one of those made up words. I
Yeah.
love that a guy can just write a nonsense kind of poem, and we all know what he's
What he
talking about.
means.
There are enough real words in there, and then now those are real words. Maybe that's what we should start doing, is just writing nonsense poetry that to influence the language going forward.
Well, and again, like kind of the it reminds me, that kind of stuff exactly reminds me of some of the made up words and names in Tolkien's work. Like you can just tell some dudes are evil just by the way their name sounds, you know. So like a word like frabjous, that's pretty silly. I think that's a happy word, you know, and it turns out it is. Yeah, so I love that kind of stuff. Well, now to I guess we'll shift to kind of the final piece of our episode, and I'm going to turn it over to Maddie to introduce a very ambitious project that we are embarking on.
So we thought it would be excellent to motivate our listeners to read more by coming up, or should I say, I think this is like the term people are using on like Instagram and now, to curate a reading challenge for 2023.
I like
And
curate.
we just,
I like that.
yeah, that's like the hit
Let's go
word
for
now.
it.
It's, you can't just organize, order, come up with, create. No, we're curating a reading challenge, but it really came from just kind of us bantering about the types of reads that we really enjoyed doing this year, or maybe challenging others to do the same types of things that we were challenged to do or want to do ourselves, and kind of encouraging people to branch out maybe out of their comfort zones, which for sure me this year was something that I did. I definitely read outside my comfort zone this year. But I think what I'll do is, do you guys want me to just read through real quick and then we can kind of itemize it after that?
Yeah.
Or do you want to just go one by one?
Go do the big overall picture and then we'll break it apart.
Okay. So we've got 12 here. So theoretically you can do one a month if you wanted to break it down that way. Definitely want it to be, approachable and accessible for
Yeah,
anyone.
that's doable.
Yeah. So the first one, first reading challenge would be a work of the Inklings. So of course, Tolkien, C.S. Lewis. There's a bunch of them. I think Owen Barfield's another one. There's a couple other more popular ones, but there's a decent list of the Inklings that you can Google. If you're following along with us, I'd say you could count the Silmarillion if you want to read along.
That's a good one.
Yeah. But if you want to be ambitious and read more, go for it. Never going to deter that. The second one would be a work from early church fathers, so the patristics, something early on, I think it's around like 451, 500, some time frame. So early church, first century, those first few centuries, read something from there. Theological work would be the next one from the 17th century. Then we have a work of poetry, then a biography. Number 6 would be medieval literature. Number 7 would be 19th century literature. Number 8 would be a detective novel. Number 9 is a 21st century literature, so something post 2000.
Thanks, Zach.
Yeah. He's gonna have a lot to say about this when we go
No
through it.
problem.
Yeah, something post Y2K if you're old enough to remember that. A tag along or a footnote book. So reading something that was either mentioned in a book that you've read or actually from the footnotes or bibliography at the end of a book that you've read. Number 11, a reread. So you get bonus points if it was from over 10 years ago.
Oh,
Unless
so
you're-
good. That's
Unless
good.
you're really young and it's like Dr. Seuss, then maybe don't go back 10 years ago.
I'm gonna read the foot book.
Left foot, right foot.
Feet.
Hungry caterpillar. And then lastly, a book that you bought this last year, so 2022, ideally, that you didn't read. Unless you're, like a heathen and didn't buy any books this year, but I know the majority of us have bought books this year that we did not read.
Oh, yeah.
Unfinished Tales. Awesome.
Oh, so good.
Yeah.
That's two for one.
Does it knock out 2 categories?
That would knock out 2
I
categories.
mean, that would be
think.
cheating if you wanted to do it that way.
Yeah.
That would be like the lazy man's version would be to try to knock out more categories in one book.
We haven't even started yet, and I'm already getting called lazy.
But we're
Zach
gracious.
might not be a mom, but he is a dad, and so he does have a little less time than the average man.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
I'm a dad too. We're gonna compare.
That's true. You're a dad.
Yeah.
What-
So
what
Number
are we
one.
comparing?
number 1, Work of the Inklings. Do y'all have any thoughts, suggestions?
The Chronicles of Narnia.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a good one. I
Yeah,
read
that's
one.
that's a good single
Charles-
book to read.
I read one Charles Williams book,
Hmm,
and I'll say this: that one's more on the challenging end.
okay.
I forget the name of it, but it's the one where the platonic forms come and break into reality.
Tell me more.
So there's like the form of the lion breaks in and is running around town. It's very weird and it's very difficult to read. But I think that would be on the very challenging end. I think the Chronicles of Narnia and like the Hobbit would be on the easier end of that set. Or would Roger Lancelin Green count? Was he an Inkling? I think he was maybe part of that, but he wrote those like retellings of
Is that the Place
Greek
of the Lion?
myths. Yeah, Place of the Lion.
Ooh.
And he wrote retellings of Lancelin Green wrote retellings of like Greek myths or Norse myths. I think that would be an easy one as well in terms of on that scale. So yes.
I don't see him. Well, I'm just gonna definitely advocate for Silmarillion again. But
Yeah.
if you're short on time, I mean, I don't know. Do we count essays? Tolkien's essay on fairy
on
stories.
fairy stories. That'd be a great
Yeah,
one.
yeah.
Everybody, we count that for everybody but Zach.
Yeah.
Your book has to be a minimum of 500 pages long.
You only like doorstopper books, so that's what we're going to recommend for you.
I'll read it. Whatever.
There's
He
a
has his
few like
different list.
there's a few compilations of Tolkien's writings that contain on fairy stories. So I don't know.
Yeah.
We're not hard pressed.
Yeah, I think
Um,
any of those are good recommendations for sure.
Yeah. So then number 2, a work from the patristics, so early church fathers. I'm going to be reading Confessions this year. It's been on my shelf for like 3 years and it's time to finally read it.
Yeah, I have that somewhere. I have an audio version of that, I think, but I haven't listened yet.
Interesting.
That might be too difficult to
Yeah.
concentrate. I don't know.
There is a a publisher that has what they call the Popular Patristics series. Trying to find the publisher name, but if you search Popular Patristics on Amazon, there's lots of good ones on there. So I would highly recommend. This is a small book. It could be some difficult language, but I think it's totally worth it. Called On God and Christ. It's the 5 theological orations of Gregory of Nazianzus, who's one of kind of the Nicene big boys. I would highly recommend that for a patristic. Obviously, there's lots of I don't know, maybe not discernment that's necessary, but we want to make sure that we're recommending you read something on the Orthodox side of things and not unorthodox, meaning things that are teaching historical Christian doctrine. So Gregory of Nazianzus is fantastic. He has another one which I think could be a fun double duty, Poems on Scripture, because Gregory of Nazianzus was also a poet too. So if you're thinking about knocking out the poetry category as well, I would highly recommend that book too. So there's this. Why can't I find the publisher name? But anyway, searching Popular Patristics on. There's also one called On the Unity of Christ, which is also very good from the same series. So
I would like this year to read, if I get around to it, Athanasius on the Incarnation. That
Yep.
one gets alluded to a lot.
yeah,
Going
that's a
earlier,
good one.
there are some of those like late 1st century, early 2nd century things like the Didache. And that one in particular is very interesting, showing what the early church did. And some of it is I wouldn't necessarily recommend, but a lot of it is very good, and it does seem very Baptist to me.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Requires
a lot of
fasting.
there's been a
before
lot of
baptism.
Baptist discussion about practices of the early church, and the Didache has come up on more than one occasion, showing that things aren't so squarely Paedo-Baptist as people like to say.
Another one I really like is First Clement, which might be the only true letter from Clement. That's a good read because he is, I think, what is he writing to the Corinthians?
Yeah,
I believe. Yeah. It's very Calvinistic towards the end of it, and a lot of justification by faith alone. So we ain't just making this up. 1500s.
It also kind of is like, you guys got several letters from Paul, and like, can you please get your act together, Corinth?
Yeah. We're all a little bit of Corinth in us, aren't we?
more than we'd like to admit.
Yeah. All right,
me.
so
I was gonna recommend Cur Deus Homo, but that's outside of the patristics time period. So
yeah, that's medieval.
That's
Is
a
that
good
Anselm?
medieval book.
Is that Anselm?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so then for number 3 we have a theological work from the 17th century. So of course 1600s. That could be Puritans. Get you some Puritan paperbacks.
Some John Owen.
And John Owen.
Go raid the Banner of Truth. There. Speaking of John Owen, I've got a good one to recommend. Hold on.
Sorry.
Back. Overcoming Sin and Temptation. I think this was a Crossway. They slightly simplified the language, but it's this one volume contains the mortification of sin in believers, of temptation, the nature and power of it, and indwelling sin. Very, very good.
Yeah.
I think I got this on Amazon.
While we're recommending, The Banner of Truth, the Puritan paperback series, is a great one. This one I'm reading just very slowly, like a little bit at a time. But Thomas Brooks' Precious Remedies Against Satan's
Ooh.
Devices is
Mm.
worth reading.
Yep.
Wow.
It's one of the thicker Puritan paperbacks, but it is a good one.
The Bruised Reed by Richard Sibbs is also very good. That's
My
another one that
husband
I
really. Go
go
for
ahead.
it. Oh, I interrupted you. Continue. Please read.
Oh, that's one that if I had my druthers, I think I would reread The Bruised Reed every year as well. It's a series of sermons. I love Sibbs. Anything Sibbs does is great. The old Sweet Dropper, but highly recommend that one. Heart of Christ by Goodwin too. I think that's Goodwin.
We need Baptists.
We need
Well,
more
there's
Baptists.
We can read Arminius.
How about not? I
What
think
about Saint Pelagius, as some people online like to call him?
My husband read this year John Bunyan, Grace Abounding.
Mm.
So he
Oh,
recommended that. So I think that might be my read.
that's an
for this year.
autobiography, right?
I believe so, yes.
Does autobiography count in the biography category too? Or does it need to be
No.
written by a person later?
It needs to be written by another person.
Fine.
That's my opinion. We didn't say autobiography.
We just said biography.
I mean, I'm not the woman here, or I'm the woman, so you make the
You're not?
decisions. I'm the man. I am. I'm not the
Is
one
it
making
me?
decisions. I'm the woman.
This is really brave of you.
I no longer identify as a woman.
And I actually prefer biographies over autobiographies anyway.
Yeah, it's a little
I
weird.
like the somebody coming in from outside with some perspective. I think that's helpful.
I did really like, in terms of Baptists, there's a compilation of covenant theology for federal 1689 federalism, and it's got Nehemiah Cox and John Owen. Yeah. And Owen wasn't a Baptist, but his covenantal views were more in line with, even though he's still
Well, and there was a
baptized
lot. He
babies.
was a Congregationalist, and there was a lot of crossover between the
Yeah.
what we now call particular Baptists and Congregationalists at that time. So
Mhm.
it does.
They just didn't reform enough.
They just they were
Yes.
just stuck. It's
Gotta
okay.
keep on reforming.
Who was it? Somebody actually wrote a book, Baptist, the only thoroughgoing reformers. I'm like, whoo, that's so good.
Sounds legit.
Shots
I
fired,
like it.
baby.
So then number 4 is a work of poetry, and I'm gonna let for sure Nick and Lee.
Go ahead, Nick. What are your recommendations?
I am actually currently reading a work of poetry, Paradise Lost by John Milton.
Nice.
And also alongside it, I'm reading a work of the Inklings, the preface to Paradise Lost by C.S. Lewis.
Nice.
And actually, that's a good pair. I think, well, obviously, it's written to be a pair to it,
Mhm.
but I think it's really interesting to read those two together. He talks a lot about epic poetry. Beowulf is an example, if you get the verse kind.
Mhm.
And
I think it's so
Homer
important to read
and Virgil.
Yeah.
So I also, as much as the Romantics had so many terrible ideas, I really do think they were good poets.
They were great poets.
And so that's another one where I'd recommend something. I don't want to recommend like Shelley, but he was a good
I don't know,
poet.
man. Ozymandias is a good
Exactly.
poem.
It's a great poem. But he was a horrible guy.
Just a horrible dude.
I struggle. I guess he's dead and he's not going to get any money from it. So
yeah, a lot of his stuff
Shelley.
is in the public domain, so you could go out
Yeah.
there on iBooks right now and download his entire oeuvre for free. So
yeah, do that. Don't give him any money. Obviously,
Yeah.
you can't. But he's dead.
I like Keats as well. He kind of has that like
Yeah.
teen emo energy. which is kind of fun. I love his sonnets. I think the sonnets are interesting. I picked up my high school copy of a selection of John Donne, who's one of the metaphysical poets. Really, I remember that being so difficult in high school, and I read it now, and I'm like, oh man, it's so simple. They say metaphysical, but the language, the poetic language, is so simple. So I highly recommend John Donne. Trying to think of
There's
on
George Herbert,
yeah.
and Reading the Temple, which might be my choice.
Canon Press redid the Temple. They have a nice volume of it. It's on my bookshelf right now. That'll probably be what I do. I've also been wanting to reintroduce myself to Emily Dickinson too. I love her poems. I think they're so tight and complex thematically, even though I think her language is also simple and easy to understand. But she really does take you for a ride thematically and subject matter wise. So I recommend her. She's coming from a very dark place, but great poems, I think.
And I have one more recommendation, which is kind of a weird one, but some of the old hymnals, like only hymns by Newton and
Is
I
that
can't remember his name right now.
the Olney
Olney? Yeah. What is his name? The guy
Watts?
who No, he was
No.
a hymn writer who was always depressed, I think.
Cooper, William Cooper.
William Cooper. So Cooper and Newton wrote only hymns. It's the name of a town, Olney, not only. It's Olney. And it's I think that they go through like the Bible and write hymns that are basically poems. They don't have music attached to them. They just have the words. And they go through and write about scripture. They write these poems. And that would be an interesting one too, because hymns are poetry. You just sing them like you would with an old epic. So that could count.
I found a website, CCEL has them, so you could read them all online.
You can read them straight off of Google.
Yeah,
I just pulled it up on my phone. Like you can read Google Books.
we have such
I
an
think Amazing
embarrassment
Grace
of
is in there.
riches.
I think
I think it
Amazing
is
Grace
in
is
there.
one of those. So you'll get to that and you'll be like, oh yeah, I've heard of this one. Or
Yeah.
you live under a rock.
Amazing Grace is listed under First Chronicles, which is interesting.
Clearly, obviously.
Yeah.
Come on.
I could not think of a more First Chronicles song.
Yeah. When I think of First Chronicles, my first thought is, oh yeah, Amazing Grace. How sweet the sound.
Yeah, how sweet, man. How sweet First Chronicles.
Judges.
And Judges. Yeah. Yeah, hit up the poetry. If it rhymes, it's good.
Even if it doesn't. Like Paradise Lost.
Yeah, that kind of breaks my mind a little bit when poetry doesn't rhyme. I'm like, wait, it's always supposed to rhyme.
See, that was always my problem. The rhymes would distract me. And I would feel like I couldn't understand the poem because I was too caught up in the rhythm and the rhyme. So I would have to work hard to like read it against rhyme and meter.
The rhythm is gonna get you.
One fish, two fish, red fish.
Rhythm is gonna get
I had to read without rhythm to not attract Shai Hulud. That's a Dune reference.
All right, so number 5. Moving on.
Thanks, Maddie.
I'm sorry. Biography. A book about somebody dead or alive. Doesn't have to be an old dead person, but it can be.
Another Banner of Truth recommendation. I'm trying to bring it up here.
I have one on John Newton that I've been waiting to read. It keeps getting pushed back in my to be read pile, but it came highly recommended. I should have brought that out here. for it, but I've heard great things. Also, the one, if you haven't read, the one Ann Judson that I read this year, that's another recommendation.
So John Piper has done a series of biographies. If y'all weren't aware of that there's some really good stuff in those. I think they're fairly short, but he has some really good. He's done C.S. Lewis. He did Edwards, who is one of his big, probably his main influence in his ministry. Yeah, there's some good ones there if you have no other.
Yeah, actually that reminds me, if you have a Ligonier learning library, you likely have several biographies in there. One of them, again, to go with my Sibbs recommendation before, Mark Dever did a biography of Richard Sibbs, because Sibbs is also really important to him too. That will be free if you have a learning library. Normally, if you buy like a Reformation study Bible or something, they give you access to a free learning library. And so that will just come with actually quite a few other books too, in there, in ebook format, of course. And then if you go to Banner of Truth, Ian Murray has written so many excellent biographies of great Christians and pastors and missionaries over the years. Ian Murray. He wrote one. He did was it 2 volumes about John MacArthur, who I think was the only living person that he wrote a biography about. J.C. Ryle, Amy Carmichael, Martin Lloyd-Jones. I think that's probably his most famous. That was a 2-volume biography. I'm trying to think. There was another one, another big one. He has one called The Forgotten Spurgeon that I've heard people talk about. So if any Spurgeon fans are looking for some more material, I think that's one that a lot of people really like. It came out in
Once he writes the book, then it's not forgotten anymore.
Yeah.
So now it's remembered Spurgeon.
Remembering the formerly forgotten Spurgeon.
Kind of ruins its own title.
I think something cool that you could do too with your biography is that you could, if you're going to do a work of poetry or, read some of the, like a Puritan, you could do a biography on that author before or after.
Idea.
I mean, that's kind of up to you what order you do this in. Sometimes it helps contextualize if it's something that you're uncomfortable reading the biography first and then reading the work. But it's also kind of fun to be familiar with their work and then read about them. That's also kind of a fun thing as well.
Nice. Yeah, good advice.
All right, we good to move on to the next one?
Let's go.
All right, so number 6, medieval literature. I think we almost all unanimously recommend Beowulf.
Definitely.
But there's others.
Cur Deus Homo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Got it.
My boy Anselm.
Gotta rep my boy.
I was kind of thinking, like, I have Chaucer, so I might read that.
There are also some good
Martin Luther
biographies from medieval biographies. So there's like Einhard writing about Charlemagne, I think. I might have these mixed up. Or Asser writing about Alfred the Great. And those are really, really interesting. Reading about what a contemporary says about one of these great medieval people like Alfred or Charlemagne. I think those are be interesting. There's also some poetry like the Song of Roland or Beowulf. Or
if you like comical violence, the Song of Roland. If you want to read about people getting sawed in half through their horses.
Yeah, the horses.
R-rated Three Stooges type stuff.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. But it's good. It is interesting.
It was fun. It was fun. Dramatic, but fun. Definitely would have been canceled. So much
for sure.
Oppressor versus oppressee. And Sir is it Sir Gawain? Is that how you say it?
Yeah. There's
Yeah.
a Tolkien translation of Sir Gawain as well.
I want to pick that up.
They did a movie. There was a movie of it that came out. It was an A24 movie. It was trash. But it could definitely uh for anybody who struggles with imagination though, it the settings were gorgeous. Like the mead hall and everything that they were in, just absolute epitome of what you would what you would see described in other works of that time. The setting, the views were amazing, but they butchered it. They butchered the story as the moderns do. So anyway,
I'm trying to decide. Okay, so I have a quote that I want to drop, but I don't think it's time yet. But the next, what I love about medieval literature, though, I guess is what I'm struggling over, is that I loved reading what like what Nick was saying, what contemporary people thought at the time. That's what's so cool about reading literature from the past, not just current literature about the past, but literature, whether nonfiction or fiction, from that time period, because you really get as much as we can being outside of their context. So yeah, that was part of what was so fun about reading Beowulf and the Song of Roland and all that kind of stuff, was just like you really kind of put in their mindset a little bit, even their priorities was pretty cool.
that was
But
like
number
reading Samuel Pepys' journal. I don't know if anybody's. I haven't finished it, but you definitely like his journal was so important in like preserving the events and the times of like the fire of London and all sorts of stuff that was happening at that moment, and also his toilet habits too. But but
he
anyway,
journaled about that.
oh yeah, man, he wrote it all down. Yeah.
Well, historians thank him, I guess. So number 7, 19th century literature. So that's, I mean, you have so many options to read really good books.
Do we even have to make recommendations?
Trollop. Don't read the Chimes.
Don't
Read the Chimes. Read
Yeah,
Trollope.
Trollope is like, I literally never heard of him. Like you've heard of Dickens and Austen and a lot of that stuff, but I had not heard of him before until you recommended. Now, of course, I see his name everywhere.
It's a big deal, but he is one of those ones that kind of flies under the radar because he's not like modernist. Like Dickens, you can kind of make it a little bit more, how we got to help the poor kind of thing. He fits well with it. Trollope, his novels are longer usually, and they're very much they're much more conservative, I think, in some ways, despite him being, I think he was a liberal, but they're a lot more conservative.
Yeah. I definitely would recommend Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. Highly recommend. It's kind of like gothic. It's not extreme gothic novel, but there's gothic elements in it, and it made it it was a fun kind of creepy read, but not like super creepy that you can't finish it. There's some scenes in there that are a little bit creepy, but yeah, I just really like Jane Eyre. I really hope that I don't talk it up too much and that people read it expecting it to be like the best book they've ever read and then hate it. But
I bought a copy today and I have huge expectations.
Oh, great.
And I hope it does live up to them.
Yeah. Well, I went into it thinking I was going to hate it, so that's maybe why I loved it so much. But it really is probably one of my favorite books, standalone books out there.
I was looking up Gaston Leroux's Phantom of the Opera. It was technically written in the 20th century, but it's about the 19th century. So it's out of the running, I suppose, but I read that in high school and I thought it was great. I loved it.
I think everyone should read like Jane Austen as well if you haven't, even if you're a man. But I think if
Yes.
you're gonna read like what you would think of, because like Austen, you think romance,
Mm.
but Jane Eyre, obviously is not a Jane Austen. But if you're gonna read anything and you're like, I don't know about all the romance, you would probably like Jane Eyre more than you would like Jane Austen.
Yeah. And there are Austen books that aren't Pride and Prejudice that number one, that you're not going to be so familiar with that it will hurt your reading of the book. But that also aren't so blatantly romancy too.
Right.
Like Lady Susan.
Lady
It's
Susan,
not
that's a
romantic at all.
no.
Yeah, it's funny.
It's funny, and she's
a
quite
terrible
an evil
human.
person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. She's a terrible human.
I thought Sense and Sensibility really tread a great line of like, even though obviously there is romance in it, but there is so much else to the story that I think it went broader than just what we would normally call a romance category too. So I really enjoyed Sense. I may reread that for this category because I really enjoyed. It'll probably be Emma though, honestly, because I haven't read Emma yet. But
Emma's good.
somebody you should read Austen because there's enough of her distinctiveness in really I think all those novels, at least the ones that I've read. You certainly get her vibe, which is good. If that's
Northanger Abbey is actually pretty good too. I started it on audio and I was struggling, and then I went to actually reading it, and then I like instantly the story just made more sense, and then I could finish it on audio if I needed to. But it's short and sweet, and it's funny. I was laughing quite a bit in that book. It was pretty funny. I think it might be kind of one of those books where if you've read enough Victorian and English literature, it's funnier because you kind of get the social jokes more than maybe if it's your first read.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. Might be different as a first timer.
Cool.
Zach, do you have any recommendations?
I recommend moving on.
Okay.
Y'all are losing me here.
He's waiting till number 9.
He's waiting for Y2K.
I'm gonna have
Make
to
it 12.
wade, like slog through these reading challenges.
Oh no.
Like, oh, I don't want to read this.
It's gonna be good for you.
Just kidding.
You'll like
Yeah,
this. The whodunits, detective novels.
That'll be fun.
Yeah. I like Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah, Sherlock Holmes is
Yeah.
number 1 in my mind.
No.
Really?
Wow.
No.
No.
Lord Peter Wimsey.
It is pretty good.
Oh,
I love Dorothy Sayers, and I think there are two characters in literature that seem real to me, and Peter Wimsey is one, and then Emma Woodhouse from Emma is the other one. So read those two. They seem like real people. They seem like actual human beings. I don't know how or why, but they do to me. Sherlock Holmes is okay though. I do.
we're not bound by any certain time period, right?
Right. You can read any.
Okay.
I mean, and if you have like kids and you want to read with your kids, like the Hardy Boys. I mean, you could read if your kids are younger. Yeah, Hardy Boys. Those are detective novels.
I've never read a
Scooby-Doo.
Poirot novel.
A what?
I like Agatha Christie.
Agatha Christie.
Yeah.
I've read
Hercule Poirot.
I've read a few Poirot books. Some of her other ones, though, like Sad Cypress, some of those that are just kind of on their own, those are some of her best as well.
Mm.
And then there's one that takes place in ancient Egypt. I think it's called Death Comes as the End or something. But it takes place in ancient Egypt. And it's a good murder mystery.
Mm.
Ooh.
Yeah,
She had a
I
husband
read
who was an archaeologist.
I read my first Sayers recently, and I was pretty hooked with that. And I just downloaded the complete Sherlock Holmes to listen with my kids to get them into that. So it's some good stuff.
That might be a little rough on the kids for a little bit, unless it's a modern language.
It's new.
like
I don't
updated
know if
language.
it's unabridged. They can handle it. I read Hounds of the Baskervilles in 6th grade.
Yeah.
So if I could have done it in 6th grade, they can do it.
That's the spirit.
I love Sherlock Holmes. It's like I have a hard time being objective about those stories. It's the way I am about Batman as well. I just love them just because it's Sherlock
Yeah.
Holmes. I don't know.
I'm actually really excited to reread Hounds of the Baskervilles because it's been so long and because I was in 6th grade. Like I have the vaguest memory of reading it, let alone the
Mhm.
story.
Yeah.
So
I
Which
really like
of
studying Scarlet too.
which one's the one that has a bunch of Mormons that that are the main villains? It's one of the 4 novels, the Sherlock Holmes novels. But that one's the one that's kind of stuck with me the most. I don't remember what the name is, but it's interesting. I love reading when
that
people
was
write
studying
about
Scarlet.
America.
That's what it was.
Is it?
Studying
Okay.
Scarlet. Yeah. I had forgotten the fact that they were Mormons.
Yeah, when they talk about America, when British people talk about America, I always find it quite interesting.
Yeah. Sign of the Four.
all right, so Zach, you're up. The 21st century literature or something written post 2000. What should people read?
Brandon Sanderson. Anything by Brandon Sanderson. No. Seriously though, he's great. I'm a fanboy.
Usually recommend like Mistborn to start with.
Yeah, so with guys like Sanderson, it's hard to recommend like one thing because you're normally recommending a series instead of just one standalone novel or something. But with him, I would start with something like Elantris. It's really good. It can stand alone. It is connected to the larger world, but it can stand alone as a novel, and it's really good.
What it was is it 21st century like anything fiction or nonfiction? What did we decide on?
I say literature, so I think that means fiction. Really. Because that's I mean that's kind of a gimme for so much of our reading is like a lot of us read theology books written in the last 20. I mean, if you're gonna read an R.C. Sproul book or something, there you go.
Yeah. So I'm gonna have to read some fiction.
I know. It's I think I will read Brandon Sanderson because I don't think I can stomach anybody else at this point. I'm not really sure.
I've not enjoyed anything I've read that's newer. Except nonfiction.
Well, okay, so the Green Ember series is really good, and that's Wingfeather.
Yeah,
Wingfeather. So
yeah,
I guess,
on the edge
but that's
of the dark
because
sea
they're
of
kind
darkness.
of they're kind of writing a little bit after the older tradition. They're not doing the whole modern YA.
Yeah.
I enjoyed Aragon. Also, it's another series, but Christopher Paolini, I think is his name.
I think that's right.
Yeah.
But I thought that was a good series. They did a terrible job on the movie, just absolutely awful. So I don't recommend the movie at all. Nobody does. Everybody hated it. It's the worst.
I remember
it's
it like
my favorite movie.
There's been some good, like somebody pointed out that part of the reason why the classics are better is because there was still a lot of trash, but then they're classics because they were good. So we also have to weed through.
They filtered out
our trash. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, like the Chimes.
Don't read the Chimes.
That is something we didn't really talk about was our do not finish. I'm curious if anyone did not finish a book for any reason, but anyways. Because I did not finish a book because it was so bad. So anyways. Okay, number 10, a tag along footnote book. I'm reading a book on the Lord's Supper that was in the footnotes from the Eastern Orthodoxy book. That won't count because I'll have it done by New Year's, so I'll have to do another one.
Just wait
For
a few
the-
days.
Yeah. Well, I've already
Yeah.
started it and I can't stop.
It's about when you finish.
Yeah. But to be honest, like half my library grows because of like footnotes.
Yeah.
Like
funny.
or if it's referenced in a book, like, oh, I guess I need to buy that and I need to buy that. So
Cool.
Yeah, I think that definitely won't be hard to do with some of the books we mentioned in the earlier categories.
yeah.
You know, though your medieval literature books. I mean, those things are loaded with footnotes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Same with the patristics books are going to be that way. And obviously the Inklings were very well read too. So you're gonna get you're definitely gonna have plenty of footnotes to choose from. That won't be hard.
Faux show. All right, and then number 11, a reread.
I love this category.
Yeah.
Yes.
Chronicles of
I-
Narnia.
It's funny too because I thought like going into this, I was like, oh, I need to reread, but like I realized like 5 books. Actually, no, because I read Chronicles of Narnia this year, so all of those are rereads plus Dracula plus Jane Eyre. Like, I actually
Yeah.
had quite a bit of rereads this last year. I think mine's going to be 1984.
That's gonna be mine as well.
That's a good book.
Yeah.
I
I
read
might
that in
do-
my early 20s.
An audio book of a book that I read as paper or the other way
Mm.
around.
Mm.
I haven't
Yeah.
really done much audiobooks because I didn't start until like earlier this year.
And then do it
So
in
I'm not really
Braille.
sure, but yeah, then I'll do it in Braille. And then hopefully by then somebody will have done an interpretive dance version.
I thought about rereading.
And then Amazon.
I'm a Hemingway fan, and so I actually considered reading one of his short story collections called In Our Time that I read it in high school, actually a couple times. It's not very long, and I really enjoyed it. And I want to see if I'd still enjoy it now.
Yeah.
That's a nihilistic dude. Super modern.
If I get to an author that I really like, I just read through everything. Like I did it with Evelyn Waugh. I really enjoyed his books, so I just blasted through all of them. I did it with Jane Austen. I've done it with a few authors. I just read all of everything that they have. I find all the collected short stories. So I might go back to like Waugh and read one of those because I read them all in a year and I loved them so much. And I think about them a lot. And I might go back and read one of those or listen maybe.
The listening's a cool idea.
Yeah. Well, and last but not least, a book that you bought this last year, so 2022, that you didn't read.
That's gonna
Who
be hard
buys
to choose
books
from.
and let them sit
So
on a
many.
shelf? Who does that?
It's actually a pretty short list for me this year. So, but I haven't ever really been one to buy a book and not read it. But I used to work for a bookstore, so I had a bunch of books that way, like that I probably haven't read. But so I do have books on the bookshelf that I haven't read. But one that I bought this year that I didn't read, that's a very short list.
Mm.
That's
Well, you
like
still got time to buy
one.
some books.
Yeah. You
Well,
got
yeah,
2 days.
yeah.
Go.
I'm pretty sure it's just this one book. So easy
The-
pickings for me.
I think I buy like
Um,
3 books for every 1 book that I read. So
Yeah,
I
that's
have a
true
lot.
for me too. Yeah.
The town that I live in has a lot of new construction, and it has gotten me thinking a lot about architecture. And so just recently I was buying some from thrift books, and you know how like you get to a certain, you have to fill a certain amount and then you get free shipping.
Mhm.
And sometimes it's just worth it to add a second book. So I got John Ruskin's The Seven Lamps of Architecture, and that is what I'm planning to be
Wow.
my read of a book that I just bought. I need to think about architecture. It's important, especially since we have so much bad architecture coming up around here.
I
So-
did a twofer while I was I may go ambitious because these books are short, but I bought two of Ryan Holiday's books. His first breakout book was The Obstacle is the Way, which is kind of like riffing on the Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, and then he just released a new book called Discipline is Destiny. Discipline is one of the things I have a lot of trouble with, and so I think that could offer some interesting help. So those will probably be my 2022 purchase. I think I'm going to try to do them both because they're short. So, and small. His books come in this weird kind of squatty format, not like your normal book dimensions. It's very strange. So, twofer.
I'm tempted to read Plato's Republic, but
Ooh.
we'll see.
Do it.
That's never tempted me once. Not once. You know what I'm tempted to read? Plato's Republic. Never happened.
Did you know Brandon Sanderson adopted Plato's Republic into the Cosmere?
Oh, I'm reading it. Sign me up.
Got him.
That didn't make
We've
any
got-
sense to me, but I'm glad of the effect.
We've got full buy-in from Zach now.
Y'all are far more well-rounded than I am. Like, oh, is this going to take me 30 hours to read and I'm going to have to do learning? No.
Do learning. Any other final comments for the good of the order? I'm really excited about this reading challenge because I always start the year with high hopes of like building a reading list, and I never get through them. I may be lucky to get halfway through, and so I think this is really helpful. This kind of thing is really helpful for me, and I hope it's really helpful for any listeners who are brave enough to take on the challenge too. So I assume we'll have some regular check-ins with how we're doing as we continue discussing the Silmarillion this year. So
Maybe we should make this a quarterly update kind of thing.
yeah, okay, sure. Quarterly update. We can do that. We can do that for you, Zach.
How far have you progressed through your list?
I'll probably like blow through the list in like 2 months, or I don't know, go on a sidetrack. I do, like you said, I like it. Helps in decision making, because that's what's hard for me is I buy so many books and then I'm like, I don't know what I want to read. So
yeah, I'm always pushing a new one to the front.
Yes.
And 12, you have a good goalpost of once a month.
Yeah.
Zach.
Thank you, Nick.
Plotting. You could get your math out and divide your page count.
Sort of like a Bible reading plan.
Kind of. Yeah,
I guess we're bad Baptists because we didn't recommend that you read your Bible, but that's kind of like goes
that's a
without
given.
saying.
It goes without saying.
Yeah.
If you're not, then do it.
The more I go on as a Christian, the less likely I am to recommend a Bible in a year plan. Because if you've read the Bible through a couple times, I think you need to drill down into particular books and really camp out and spend some time. But
read them in different versions. And
I do recommend at least one time doing a speed read of the Bible, basically. Like there's
like a 40-day plan.
Yeah, there's like a 90-day or a 30-day. That's a lot more intense, because you need to set aside more time to read. But it's more of a, hey, we're going to get a real broad overview of the whole story of the Bible.
Yeah.
Instead of.
Yeah, it definitely helps to have an overview before you go too deep.
Yeah.
On one.
A sense of the meta narrative.
One thing that I've liked to do this year is I started writing or copying scripture just so just like doing a whole book at a time. I really liked that. It's helped me to remember, like, it helps you with following the thought process, kind of how it's written. You focus on words because you're having to write the words, so things that you would miss maybe in a general reading through because you think you're familiar.
Mhm.
And then it also helps you retain where certain passages are in the book because you've kind of like really trudged it through. I have, however, failed at memorizing scripture this year, so take that for what it's worth. One of my 2022 goals, fail. Memorize Romans 8, fail.
Turn it into a
That's always
song.
next year.
Sing Romans 8.
I would, that would be excellent. I think that would work really quickly.
Yeah, put it in meter.
Hmm.
It
I
could
wish
be an
that there was
epic
a
rap.
musician.
Yeah.
Hey, you know, there's a really cool band out there, and I'm not plugging my own.
All right.
Plug
I'm
it.
not
Well,
Plug
plugging.
the basement tapes.
Listen, okay, the Basement Band, we did a 2-volume set of Psalm 119, the whole psalm, a song for each section of the psalm. I recommend that, obviously, but as to the Romans thing, there's a group out there called Psallos, Psallos. They did Romans.
Okay.
It's not like a verse for verse, but they hit all the themes of Romans, and it's saturated with scripture. They've done Hebrews and Jude,
Nice.
so those are
Wow.
a little weirder. I like Romans the best out of just as far as the music goes, but I recommend listening to that too. That's really cool.
Nice.
We're on Spotify.
There will be a link in the show notes. We'll make sure we get people listening to the basement tapes.
Thanks, Lee.
You're welcome.
These notes
All
are
right.
going to be like a novel length.
It's
Yeah.
gonna be a lot of links, not gonna lie. Yeah. It's okay.
That's cool.
It's all good. If only we had a Amazon affiliate link, man, that would be great. But we don't. I don't. Well, I may look into it, see if it's possible. We'll see.
Good idea.
All right. Well, thank you all very much. This has been again another wonderful episode, a little different than what we've been doing, but it's really exciting to kick this off and excited to see where it goes. So until next time, may Monway keep you in the one, and peace out.